Berlin, a late spring night in 1841. The darkness was as thick as Chinese ink, stirred only by the flickering oil lamp on the desk of a young man who had just received his doctorate in philosophy. Karl Marx took a long drag from his cigar, the acrid smoke mingling with the smell of old paper and unfinished thoughts. The cramped rented room, its four silent walls laden with the works of Hegel, Spinoza and Feuerbach, seemed to suffocate under the weight of the great questions wrestling in its owner's mind. The diploma from the University of Jena lay there, solemn and still, incapable of answering the most fundamental question that had tormented him for years. Is there a transcendent power above man, determining his fate, or is it man himself, with his own hands and mind, who has created everything, including God? History to him was not the grand unfolding of an absolute idea as Hegel preached. It was something cruder, more material, drenched in the sweat and blood of human beings. But where did human consciousness come from? What had sown in this naked creature the thirst for knowledge, the capacity for reason, and the dread of the metaphysical? Exhausted, Marx dropped his head onto the freshly inked manuscript. Sleep came upon him not as a peaceful rest, but as a drift into the indefinite. The room was gone, the oil lamp extinguished. Around him was an infinite space, with no up or down, no beginning or end. A great silence reigned, yet it was not empty. He felt a presence, an omnipotent consciousness observing him. And then a voice arose. It did not come from any particular direction, but seemed to be the sound of the cosmos itself, deep, majestic, yet without anger. Karl Marx, son of reason. You spend your youth searching for the world's essence in letters and logical arguments. You say that man is the master of history, that material existence determines consciousness. But I ask you, who breathed life into that lump of matter? Who breathed a soul into the vessel of dust so that it could think and ponder its own existence? Who makes the barren earth yield grain, and who taught your bare hands to labor? Marx felt no fear. On the contrary, he felt a supreme intellectual stimulation. This was the dialogue he had always sought. He stood tall in that formless space, his gaze steady, and began to speak. His voice as calm as if he were debating in a university hall. Your Highness, if you are indeed the one whom humanity calls God, Marx began respectfully, then I shall venture a reply. It was not a divine soul breathed in from without. It was labor itself in the process of man transforming nature with his hands and tools that created consciousness. When the ape-man first picked up a stone to crack a nut, that very moment separated him from the animal kingdom. The hand was freed, and from that material act thought began to form. The grain of wheat is born not of a miracle, but of the farmer's sweat soaking into the earth. Consciousness, sir, is the highest product of organized matter. Marx paused, peering into the endless void before him. And religion, he continued, his voice lowering with a note of compassion. Religion is not a truth sent down from the heavens. It is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, and the soul of soulless conditions. It is the opium of the people, not to condemn them, but to see that they are in such pain that they require a sedative. The space was silent for a moment. Then a soft, profound laugh echoed, not of mockery, but of the amusement of a master craftsman watching his child try to decode his own creation. A most complete and self-contained explanation, O philosopher. You have built a world that has no need for me. So then, in this world of yours, can man live without faith? If they no longer believe in a creator, no longer hope for a paradise, no longer fear a hell, what then will they believe in to overcome suffering, to maintain morality, to keep from devouring one another in this crude order you describe? Marx grew thoughtful. This was a profound question. It struck at the very core of humanism. He knew his answer would shape the entirety of his future thought. They will no longer need to believe in something outside of themselves, Marx replied, his voice now firm with conviction. If they do not believe in you, they will begin to believe in each other. In the power of the collective of the community, faith in paradise will be replaced by the will to build a just society right here on earth. The fear of hell will be replaced by a sense of responsibility to one's fellow man. When humanity truly believes in the power of its own species, it will no longer need grand illusions to comfort its loneliness or its powerlessness. Morality will not come from divine decree or deterrence, but from the understanding that the free development of each is the condition for the free development of all. The voice of Allah sounded again, this time with a new tone, both a challenge and a guide. You speak of labor as if it were the source of all value. But look around you. For the same act of labor, why does one man become exceedingly rich while another remains forever poor? Why does the product made by the worker's hand turn back to dominate him, to enslave him to it? If labor is so divine, why does it create a hell on earth for the very people who labor? Is it not possible, within this labor you so praise, there hides an alienation, a contradiction you have yet to solve? Allah's question hung in the infinite space, as sharp as a scalpel, aimed directly at the heart of Marx's doctrine. It was not a refutation, but an exposure of a contradiction from within. Marx did not flinch. On the contrary, his eyes lit up with a strange intensity. He had seen this contradiction, had lived with it, had agonized over it every time he walked through the working-class districts of Berlin or Cologne. Now he had to name it. You have touched upon the deepest wound of our age, Almighty One, Marx said, his voice resonating with deep empathy. You are absolutely right. Labor in its current form is a living hell. But the problem lies not in the nature of labor itself. The problem is that it has been perverted. What you see is not labor as man's free creative life activity. It is alienated labor. Marx raised his hand as if grasping an invisible concept. Allow me to explain. This alienation occurs in four aspects, like the four walls of a prison that confines the worker's spirit. First, man is alienated from the product of his labor. He articulated clearly. The weaver produces silk, but he may never wear it. The miner extracts coal from the earth, but his own family shivers from the cold. The products of their hands no longer belong to them. They become alien objects, a hostile power. The more he works, the richer and more powerful the world of material wealth he creates becomes. The poorer and more destitute he himself becomes. The product of labor now confronts labor as something alien, as a power independent of the producer. Second, and more profoundly, man is alienated from his own act of production, Marx continued, his voice growing more intense. For the worker, labor is not a satisfaction of a need, but merely a means to survive. He does not go to the factory for the joy of creation, but for a meager wage. His work is therefore not self-affirmation, but self-sacrifice, a form of torment. While working, he does not feel he belongs to himself, but to another. He is only truly himself when he leaves the factory. His life activity has been stolen, and only his animal functions remain. The void listened. Marx felt as if he was speaking to the conscience of the universe itself. Third, from this, man is alienated from his species' essence. His voice dropped. What distinguishes man from the animal? An animal only produces what it immediately needs for itself. Man, however, can produce freely, can produce beauty, can produce according to the laws of art and science. Free, conscious activity is the species' essence of man, but alienated labor robs him of this. It turns his free life activity into a mere means to maintain physical existence. Man is severed from his spiritual self, reduced to the level of an animal, and finally, when man is alienated from his product, from his labor, from his very species' essence, the inevitable consequence is that he is alienated from his fellow man, Marx concluded. If the product of labor does not belong to the worker, to whom does it belong? It belongs to another being outside of labor, the capitalist. This alienated relationship creates domination. Society is divided into owners and non-owners, masters and servants. Comradeship and natural cooperation are replaced by competition, envy, and indifference. Man sees his fellow man not as a brother but as a rival or as a tool to be used. Marx fell silent. His argument was a tight, closed circle. He had dissected the sickness of his age without a metaphysical scalpel. The voice of Allah returned, no longer a question but a pensive observation, carrying the depth of millennia of human history. You call it alienation, Karl, a sharp philosophical term. But are you not merely describing in a new language a very old story? The story of Adam, who ate the forbidden fruit and was cast out of the Garden of Eden, condemned to toil and sweat upon a cursed ground. Is it not possible that this alienation you speak of is not the product of a certain mode of property, but rather an inherent spiritual condition of man when he turns his back on his origin? The voice continued, a stream seeping into every layer of Marx's reasoning. You blame an other who stands outside of labor. But who created this other? Was it not greed, pride, and the lust for possession within the human soul that gave birth to him? Was it not man's forgetting that all wealth on this earth is mine, and that they are merely its stewards, that cause them to fight, to plunder, and to enslave themselves and their brothers? O materialist, you seek the cause in the relations between man and man. But I see the deeper cause in the relation between man and his maker. Your alienation, in the final analysis, is alienation from God. Allah's argument, like a metaphysical fog, enveloped the entirety of Marx's stark analysis. The story of Adam and Eden was a powerful metaphor, deeply embedded in the subconscious of Western civilization for millennia. It reduced all human suffering to an original sin, a spiritual fall. But Marx did not retreat. He knew that to dispel this fog, he had to use the torch of history itself. A tragic and haunting story indeed, Marx replied, his tone holding no irony, but a serious acknowledgement of the power of myth. The tale of Adam, the fall and labor as punishment, has comforted and explained suffering for millions. But, Your Highness, just as religion is the heart of a heartless world, this myth is the distorted memory of a real historical tragedy. Marx gazed into the void, as if seeing through the layers of time. You suggest that greed, pride, and the desire for possession are inherent in the human soul, the cause of all alienation. But I ask you, a man in a primitive communist society, where everything is held in common, where they hunt one beast together and share every piece of meat to survive, could he have developed greed as we understand it today? Could the desire for possession exist when the concept of private property had not yet been born? He paused, letting the question sink into the silence. No, sir. Human nature is not an immutable constant created by you. It is a product of history, shaped by the very material conditions in which humans live. Greed and selfishness are not the cause, but the result of a profound socio-economic revolution that took place in the distant past. The Garden of Eden your story speaks of, Marx continued, his voice growing powerful as if turning a forgotten page of history, is the metaphorical image of the era of the primitive commune, when man lived in harmony with nature and with his fellows, when labor was a collective activity and its fruits were enjoyed in common. Man then was not alienated because he was not yet separated from his community nor from the product of his labor, and the forbidden fruit that Adam ate. It was not a literal fruit. That forbidden fruit was private property. Marx's declaration resounded like thunder. The first man who, having enclosed a piece of ground, bethought himself of saying, "This is mine," and found people simple enough to believe him, was the real founder of our unjust civil society. That was the moment of humanity's true fall. The emergence of private ownership of the means of production shattered the primeval equality. It gave birth to the other you speak of, not from innate greed, but from a new relation of production. He who owned the land and tools, and he who owned nothing but his own labor power. The history of all-class society began from that point. Greed, selfishness, domination, all are but the spiritual children of the regime of private property. Marx looked directly into the void. So you see, my alienation is not an alienation from God. It is a concrete, profane, historical event. Man turned his back on his fellow man, long before he felt the need to invent a supreme being to then turn his back on. The other, the capitalist, is not the embodiment of human desire. It is the existence of the capitalist-worker relationship that produces and nurtures that desire, turning it into a driving force of history. The problem lies not in the soul, but in the economic structure of society. The voice of Allah sounded once more, calm and piercing. A perfect theory, Karl. You have traced sin back to its ultimate material roots. But I ask you, if everything is determined by the relations of production, if consciousness is merely a reflection of material existence, then where is freedom? Your man, your proletarian, is he any different from a puppet, pulled by the iron strings of economic laws that you yourself have laid bare? If history moves according to its own inexorable laws, from primitive communism to slavery, feudalism, capitalism, and finally communism, then what is the role of human will, of moral choice, of the revolutionary spirit? Is the revolution you call for also just a pre-programmed result of history? And are your communists merely unconscious tools of economic law? Or is there still within them a spark, something that cannot be reduced to matter, a belief in justice, a desire for liberation that comes not only from an empty stomach? Allah's question struck like a thunderbolt against Marx's edifice of reason. It was the eternal question. In a universe that runs on laws, what room is there for human freedom? If history is a train running on the inevitable tracks of economics, are not revolutionaries merely its passengers, however noisy, still powerless against the predetermined route? Marx did not answer immediately. He was silent, not out of confusion, but out of respect for the magnitude of the question. This was the intersection of philosophy and action, of recognition and practice. A magnificent question, Marx finally spoke, his voice no longer argumentative, but filled with deep contemplation. Perhaps the most crucial question of all. You are right to say that history moves according to laws, but you are mistaken to think that law is synonymous with slavery. Freedom, Your Highness, is not arbitrariness. It is not the ability to escape all laws. That is an illusion. He raised a finger in the formless space. Imagine a sailor at sea. Is he free? An ignorant man would say freedom is when the boat can go wherever he wants, against the wind and the currents. That man would soon be drowned. The truly free sailor is not the one who ignores the wind and the tides. On the contrary, he is the one who understands them best, who measures the force of the wind, who calculates the flow of the water and then raises his sails, using the very harsh laws of nature to steer his vessel to his desired harbor. Freedom is the recognition of necessity and the action based upon that recognition. So it is with the proletariat, Marx said, his eyes burning with fire. They are not puppets. Throughout history, other oppressed classes have risen up in desperation, like reckless boats fighting a storm they do not understand. The proletariat is the first class in history with the capacity and the mission to understand the laws of motion of capitalist society, to understand the nature of exploitation and alienation. Their revolution is not a blind act of rage, but the self-conscious act of a class that has grasped the laws of history in its hands. It is the moment when man ceases to be the object of history and becomes its creative subject. He addressed Allah's final question directly. You ask about the spark, the thirst for justice that comes not only from an empty stomach. That spark is real. It's not a gift from you, but the noblest product of matter itself. It is the scream of our trampled species' essence, the rebellion of human dignity when it is turned into a commodity, the pain of alienation that has reached its peak and must negate itself. It is true humanism, born from the ashes of inhumanity. When the worker becomes conscious of his chains, that consciousness is more powerful than the chains themselves. And the act of shattering those chains is the ultimate act of freedom. When man fully masters his social relations, masters the process of production, masters history, he will step out of the kingdom of necessity and into the kingdom of freedom. He will no longer need a god in heaven, because together they will have become the gods of their own material world. The infinite space fell into a solemn silence. The dialogue seemed to have reached its conclusion. The voice of Allah was heard one last time, no longer questioning, but like a whisper from history itself, both distant and intimate. O Karl Marx, you do not wish to overthrow me. You wish for mankind to complete the work of creation that I began. You want them to mold their own nature from the clay of history, to breathe into themselves the soul of collective consciousness. The voice faded, dissolving into the void. Perhaps the journey of man creating himself through pain and struggle, freeing himself from the very chains he has forged. Perhaps that is the highest form of worship I could ever expect. The dim light of the dream dissipated. Marx awoke with a start. The room was the same, cold and cluttered. The oil in the lamp was nearly gone. Outside the window, the dawn was breaking in a shade of silver gray. The familiar scent of cigar smoke and ink filled his nostrils, but within him something had changed forever. The philosophical torment was over. An iron will had taken its place. He had seen the path forward, not through faith, but through scientific analysis and an unshakable belief in humanity. He picked up his pen. The black, decisive ink flowed onto the white page. He did not continue a philosophical dissertation to interpret the world. He began to draft the program for its liberation. In order to change it, he had spoken with the soul of the past, and now he knew he must speak to the future of mankind.